Good morning and welcome to the channel. I've owned a 30 kilowatt Nissan Leaf for nearly 4 years now. So today I'd like to talk about what it's like for an old codger like me to live with an EV. I'd like to talk about what's good about it, what's bad about it, and hopefully by the end of this video you'll be able to decide for yourself whether it might be the right thing for you. If this is useful to you, please hit the like button down below, consider subscribing, and I'll be pleased to answer any questions that you have if you put them in the comments down below. So let's have a look at the car's instrumentation. This is the start button, foot on the brake, press the button, and it starts with a merry little jingle. So we've got our speedometer, time and the temperature. Down here we've got the equivalent of a fuel gauge. This tells us how much distance we've got left in the battery, 106 miles at the moment because it's fully charged. On the outside of it, this is our battery health. I've got 11 out of 12 bars there. There's the odometer, the trip meter, and the battery percentage. It's fully charged, so 100% at the moment. Over to the left, we've got the battery temperature, which is important when you're rapid charging because it tends to put the temperature up a little bit. Climate control is just like any other car. A standard infotainment system with radio, CD, and Bluetooth connectivity. This button with the little blue circle is all the electric vehicle specific controls. We've got things like climate control timer, all the various energy information relating to how efficiently we're driving and so on. There's a charging timer which is set between midnight and 4:30. I'm with Octupus, which gives me very cheap electricity at that time, around 7p per kilowatt hour. If you're interested in transferring to Octupus, there's a referral code down below which will give you £50 off your first bill. This is the gear selector. Across and back to put in drive, across and forward to put in reverse, and press the central button to put it in park when you stop. So just how easy is it to charge an electric car? Let me show you. So to charge this car up, I just release the little flap, unwind the charging wire, undo that. I plug in just like that, and then I check the LEDs to make sure that it's charging properly. Charging on a 7 kilowatt home charger like this takes around 4 hours from empty. Before I had the home charger, I used to charge off a normal 13 amp plug, and that would take around 10 hours. If I'm out doing a long road trip, of course, I need to use public chargers. Public chargers come in two flavours. There are rapid chargers, which, as the name suggests, charge the car up pretty quickly. Around 30 minutes is normally enough to go from 20% to 80% in the case of this car. Then there are the public level 2 chargers. They take a lot longer to charge, but are a lot cheaper, and in some cases they're free. So how much does it cost to charge an electric car? Well, I'm on a very good tariff, and my overnight charging costs just 7p a kilowatt hour. It usually takes around 20 kilowatt hours to charge the car, so that works out at around £1.40 for a full charge. Charging during the daytime costs around 30p a kilowatt hour, and that's a little bit more expensive. So that would work out at around £6 for a full charge. And what about the cost of rapid charging? Well, it typically costs around 57p per kilowatt hour to use a rapid charger, so that would work out at £11.40 for the same 20 kilowatt hours. So what's it like to charge at a public charger? Electric vehicle chargers are not as obvious as petrol stations, so it's not usually a good idea to just wander around and try and find one. The best thing to do is to use an app like ZapMap or PlugShare, or very often if you've got an electric car, the sat-nav in the car will have an option to find the nearest charging station. But car sat-navs tend to be a little bit less reliable. Public charging stations aren't as reliable as petrol stations. It's not unusual to turn up at a charger and find that it's not working. So it's always a good idea to have a plan B. Another problem with public chargers is when you turn up and all the chargers are in use. Unlike petrol stations where there may be 10 or 12 pumps and they're usually quickly vacated, with EV chargers there's often only 1 or 2 chargers, and you could be waiting anything up to half an hour or more for the charger to become vacant. Often it's a better idea to just move on to another charging station. Paying for your electricity at a public charger is another issue. If you're paying to fill up your petrol car, well, you can either hand over cash or you can hand over a credit or a debit card. Nice and easy. Paying for your electricity is a slightly different matter. While some chargers, like the grid-serve chargers that you found on motorways, will take a credit or a debit card, others require you to use an app while still others can use an RFID card. The problem with this, especially for an old codger like me, is that chargers are operated by a number of different companies. So you end up with lots of different apps on your smartphone, each linked to an account which requires a separate username and password. In some cases you're required to top up your account in advance. It's a nightmare. And what about range? Well, this car is 6 years old and has a real-world range of 100 miles in the summer under ideal conditions. In the winter, when the battery is less efficient and the heating's being used, the range can be as little as 70 miles. Driving at motorway speeds is one thing that depletes range very quickly, and can see a 100-mile range quickly reduced to around 70 miles or even less. The solution to this is to slow down and keep the speed to below 60 miles an hour. So what about battery degradation? So the battery in this car is guaranteed for a minimum of 8 years or 100,000 miles, whichever comes first, to degrade to no more than 70% of the original capacity. The battery on an electric vehicle doesn't suddenly stop working as it gets older, it just gradually loses capacity and range with age, a bit like me really. An electric vehicle battery should last at least 10 years and probably longer if it's looked after well. So what about range anxiety? When I first picked up the car, it had not been fully charged. There was only about 65 miles of range left and I had 60 miles to drive. Because I'd never had an EV before, I didn't have any of the apps needed to charge my car up. I figured that I could drive slowly and get back with plenty of charge left. I got home with 3 miles to spare. And this is the only time I've really had any real range anxiety. I charged at home from a 13 amp plug using the granny charger, used ZapMap to find all my local chargers, and set up all the apps for charging on my mobile phone. Over the following week, I quickly got used to the range the car had to offer and found it fairly predictable in terms of how far it would go on a charge. The charging network has improved over the last 4 years, and many chargers, like the GridServe chargers that you find in motorway service stations, now take a credit or debit card, eliminating the need to have an app on your smartphone. They do, however, get a little busy at times. So what about maintenance? Well, electric vehicles have regular service intervals just like petrol cars, but there's no engine to maintain. So no oil changes, cam belts to replace or exhaust to change. That really only leaves the suspension, tyres, pollen filter and the aircon. A minor service from a main dealer costs around the same as it does for a petrol car, even though there's a lot less work to do. So, to sum up, EV ownership has worked out well for me, but then I'm lucky. I've got a driveway where I can charge my car. Most of the time I do less than 50 miles a day, and for longer road trips I've got access to a petrol car if I need it. As for long road trips in the Leaf, they're certainly possible, but you have to be the sort of person that's not in too much of a hurry, content to move on to the next location if a charger's occupied or not working, and happy to set up accounts with several different companies for charging and have their apps installed on your smartphone. Oh yes, and have a spare smartphone in case you lose your main phone or drop it and it smashes into 1,000 pieces. So I'd say that electric cars in themselves are great. They've got enough range, they're cheap enough to run, although currently they're a little bit too expensive to buy. The main problem is the charging network. Not enough chargers, and they're not as easy to use as they should be. For those of us in our 60s, 70s or 80s, we may not want to own a smartphone, and even if we do, setting up and using an app just so that we can refuel our cars may not be as intuitive as it is for most youngsters. So, thank you very much for watching. If you liked this video, please hit the like button, it helps the channel out a lot. And if you have any ideas for any future videos, please put them in the comments below, because I'd love to hear from you.